Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. This video, I'm continuing my analysis into advanced theories in political philosophy, and I'm actually going to conclude my section on Al-Farabi. The content of Al-Farabi within the text is substantially longer than what I'm going to allocate for this section of the video. As I said, the video lectures are a means of supplementing the existing information. So I'm not going to go through and do an itemized, detailed blow-by-blow of Al-Farabi's thoughts, primarily because a lot of the concepts are, in a contemporary sense, antiquated. It's a bit difficult to apply, Al-Farabi that is, to Western political ideology, Western political theory. But what I want to do specifically today is take the last section that I decided to include on Al-Farabi and try and directly apply it to Western political theory, Western political ideology. So, as you guys know, the series is dedicated to advanced theories, so I'm not going to do the introductory bits of attempting to analyze and contextualize the content information. I'm going to hope that you already have that background information if you've been watching the series. I've been doing this series for a while now, and the feedback that I've gotten from the community is that it's fine. Everybody who's on board is on board. So I'm going to continue with that. This will be the last section, section 2.1, that I will discuss on Al-Farabi, and then I'll move to another political theory, political theorist. So with that, this is section 2.1, bottom of page 7. As you guys know, to access the notes, just click the link in the description field. It'll take you to the PDF. Download the PDF, as I've recently updated the notes. And with that, let's begin. So this is Advanced Theories. Advanced Theories. Advanced Theories in Political Philosophy, and this is section 2.1. Okay, so this section is, this first bit is on what I've classified Al-Farabi on the warlike virtue. Remember that we're reading an excerpt from Mahdi, and his analysis of Al-Farabi. So the quotes that I'm going to be reading aren't quotes from Al-Farabi, they're quotes from Mahdi, if I pronounce that right. Right? So let's go through and read this bit. Right? So this is the motivation for war, directly according to the author, referencing Al-Farabi. So basically, secondary source. Quote: "Since not all men can be conceived or convinced, or aroused to perform virtuous activities by means of persuasive and passionate speeches, the method of persuasion or consent is not sufficient. Not everyone is going to be susceptible to argument. Not everyone is going to be susceptible to logic. So it's not going to be sufficient. We need another means of, quote-unquote, persuading individuals who aren't susceptible to logic and reason. The ruler has to use force and compulsion with those who, out of nature or habit, cannot be educated, right? Cannot be educated or persuaded to obey the law spontaneously." And this is page 219 from the text, right? So the idea is we have the role of the educator. And this is the role of the educator specifically within the political regime. We recognize from the last section we talked about various forms, generalized forms of regimes with respect to Al-Farabi. Each of those regimes has a role of facilitating education to the masses. Each of those educators have two generalized distinct types. The first type of educator, so this would be type 1, and then type 2. The first type of educator, so this is educator. The first type of educator educates by means of persuasion. Right? The first type of educator educates by means of persuasion. The second type of educator, as he says, educates by means of compulsion. Right? So the idea of persuasion is an appeal, but it is an appeal to logic. It's an appeal to reason, right? It is, and we know from the beginning that Al-Farabi incorporates a lot of the Platonic discourse in terms of the three levels, if you will, or the three classes, the three metals, some people say, and incorporates the Platonic discourse on the three metals into, which obviously comes from the Republic, into his analysis, right? So we would recognize that the philosopher king and the ruling class, if you will, the educated elite, are in a position to educate those receptive members of the community based on an appeal to logic, an appeal to reason, right? So that this persuasion is always going to be an appeal to reason, right? I shouldn't say reason or logic, it's basically the same thing, right? Reason or logic, right? Compulsion is no longer an appeal, right? There isn't an appeal that's being made since we recognize that some members of the population refuse to be educated, refuse to understand logical, rational deliberation, and then make their decisions and actions accord with reason. This segment of the population, which unfortunately is probably a much larger segment, we'll get to that in a little bit, which is unfortunately is probably a much larger segment of the population, can't be reasoned with. And what we must do, that we being the other type of educator, what we must do is we must force them. We must implement compulsion. We have to force, through physical force, psychological force, get the people to act, right? So that compulsion results in the use of educational validation to the use of educational justification to validate force. Right? We're going to use force on this community of people because this community of people refuses to be educated. And so far as they refuse to be educated, we can't appeal to them, quote unquote, we can't appeal to them with reason. The only way to make an appeal to these people is to use force, because that's the only thing that they understand, right? So this is a very, very old argument, right? Sort of paradoxically, if you will, really nothing has changed, right? The argument is basically the same argument, which is specifically why it was this argument that I chose, because the contemporary Western application of Al-Farabi's discourse on both the ruler and the ruler's warlike qualities and the education via compulsion applies almost you know, in a one-to-one overlay over today's Western society. The idea then is, and you know, it's interesting if you think about it, and again, you know, a lot of my lecture series, despite the fact that I have sort of very detailed notes for myself, a lot of it is sort of information that just comes to me while I'm lecturing. While I was thinking about this just now, the idea of validation means that there has to be some type of correlation, right? There has to be a way of, there has to be some structures in which the educated class can validate, legitimize the use of force in controlling the population. Interestingly enough, you know, ever since I've done the anti-intellectual video, I'm perpetually finding myself referring back to that video, right? That video too was a lot of sort of gut check, right? It was on the fly as well. I mean, it had a generalized account of how it was going to unfold, but the idea is there is a sense in which there's a danger in education, right? Education can and does, and we've seen this in Al-Farabi, legitimize the use of force. You would be foolish to think that education and the educators do not legitimize and use force as compulsion. I'm going to implement compulsion. I'm going to manifest compulsion in the use of physical, psychological force, right? Force to obviously control. So that idea is there has to be a validation. There's a correlation, right? I would imagine it's something like, okay, we have maybe something like this. We have education, I'll just put edu. we have education on the one hand, and then